bill of goods that was sold to the market, and that's where this AI bubble talk is coming from, which was that if we just throw more compute at the problem, we're going to get over that hurdle.
It came out yesterday that essentially 4,000 customer service jobs at Salesforce no longer exist. And Mark pointed directly to AI being the cause, the culprit, or the innovation that led to that.
To get after work. And then the agentic part of that, where I have small models talking to big models, talking to enterprise models. That's exciting, right?
That's the future I want to see. I don't ever want to have to use another piece of software again. I want to be able to drive everything through a language interface, whether that's email or chat or like a text thread on my phone or talking to my phone, and that's it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Code and Connor podcast. My name is Connor Deek, CEO of CodeStrap, and I'm joined, as always, with the original CodeStrap himself and CTO, Dorian Smiley. We're going to be bringing you guys the latest and greatest around Palantir, the tech, the company, the community. We'll also be discussing insights on other companies, things happening in the world of AI, of data, of consulting, of investing, and any meaningful topic that requires attention. The focus of today's episode is the AI progress and the potential bubble. Has it burst? Is it bursting? And does it matter with the potential market value that will be generated and its benefits for the public and private sector? We're joined today by Pat Mack, founder and CEO of PVM Inc. After retiring from his position as a Naval Officer, Pat launched PVM in 2010 and has since guided its growth from a one-person startup into a multi-million-dollar firm. For more than a decade, PVM has partnered with Palantir on government deployments across the public sector. Pat, thank you for your service and welcome to Code and Connor.
Absolutely thrilled to be here. Really appreciate the invitation and opportunity to chat with you as we were talking prior to starting. Always great to be with a fellow Beaver. Go Beavs. And for the Army folks in the audience, it's go Navy, beat Army all day, every day.
I'm an Air Force family, so we'll leave them aside for now.
My dad's Army, so.
There we go. All right, guys. Well, first topic on the docket is the AI bubble. We've had a bunch of research and reports come out. So has it popped? Are we heading for the trough of disillusionment, or is it a bunch of noise and headlines?
Yeah, I think there was a lot that came out last week. We're going to take a look at the All-In Pod. They talked a bit about this, but also the MIT study we're going to dive into, and the NVIDIA paper that came out about small language models being the path forward for progress. I think all of this is sort of, there was also an interview with I think it's the co-founder of, or the founder of Cohere that I sent you yesterday too from 20 VC.
Yep.
And he was talking a lot about this too, that like Sam Altman didn't do the world any favors by going out and necessarily saying that AGI was right around the corner and that we need to regulate this now and that it's all doom and gloom and that the future has turned out to be much more nuanced than we thought, except, we've been saying this for years. I've been saying this since 2022, is that there isn't going to be this one large Oracle model. There's a lot of work that's going to go around the engineering around the models to make them useful. Sean has talked a lot about this. He, at our Denver meetup, he came in and he showed the chart, and the chart is just convergence, right? So all the capabilities of the model are just going to the same up into the right corner, and that's hitting that asymptote right there. Yeah. And Sean was like trying to make the point that, hey, you need a platform that's going to make these things useful because they're going to reach a capabilities boundary where we're not going to start making more progress. And I think what you're seeing now is like, how do we take this really valuable technology that is changing software and actually leverage it in a way that can solve some of the problems we see with it because it has some built-in issues,
No, 100%, Dorian. Completely agree with you. I'll offer my comments rooted in this bias, right? Where I've been working in this data-driven space since, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, since 1987, when I joined the world's finest Navy. And really, I think if you look at this in context, digital transformation's tough, right? So there's been a few over that span of time, technologies that we consider disruptive, but have been that are now table stakes that enable transformation. Connecting computers, right? Putting everybody having computer on their desktop. Disruptive. Took us a while to kind of figure out how do we get value out of that. I think the same can be said about the internet. If you go back to the original streaming, Netflix, were putting stuff in the mail, right? That was disruptive. And so if you look at the large language or frontier models in that context, where we finally figured out what to do with these volumes of data that we've collected over the last 2 decades, and how do I extract value out of that in a way that enables me to deliver impact against a set of missions, right? And I started my thoughts rooted in that basis where, given my history in uniform and then our work in the public sector, how do I deliver impact in a way that's efficient, effective, and it's transformational? So I don't ascribe to the doom and gloom, yet, given the early days of where we are and the fact that digital transformation remains to be a really challenging problem.
Well, we seem to run into like the most prolific hype cycles around AI at a pace that we've never seen before, at least that anyone can remember. It's like a hype cycle on we have oracles, everyone's going to lose their job, to the hype cycles of a single article or report from MIT saying the whole world is falling or the sky is falling. Yeah, I think what's really interesting here is like digital transformation, yes, is really hard, but right now we're trying to achieve that digital transformation with a brand new technology at such a pace that every time we run into some type of report that calls attention to either successes or failures, that everyone like re-ups into some type of hype cycle.
There's one thing that's new there though, like digital transformation had the hype cycle in 2018-ish, and it was all about like bringing all your data into a data lake, right? Like you got to bring all your data in, you're going to unlock all these insights, and it was the same consulting partners out there pushing that. And I saw a great, I think it was Wall Street Millennial or one of these YouTube videos where it was like, big data hasn't delivered a single dime of value to almost anyone anywhere, because these companies' margins have stayed the same forever, and so it was. I think the difference here, though, is that there has been so much capital investment that there are a lot of people sitting on the sidelines going, is that going to pay off? Because if it doesn't, we are talking about a massive economic bubble. Like it could be catastrophic and trigger, in my opinion, could trigger bigger problems in the market. And so I think what's happening is you do have some people who are trying to be healthy skeptics and constantly question this, because what's seems to be the trend has been just continuing that capital investment full speed ahead, with the bet that it's going to pay off, but no one really knowing how. Like, what does this look like when it does pay off? And so maybe it's a little different than the previous.
And I agree with you. We've got kind of this layered set of lots of promise, not a lot of delivery across all of that disruptive technology. And also share your views of the bubble, right? If you look at the trends of first to $100 million of capital investment, and now it's first to $1 billion and $100 billion of capital investment, when we really don't have a way to monetize that return, right? We're all betting on the proverbial come. If we go back and again root my bias, right? So when did I engage in this problem space? As Connor said, I founded a tech company all in on Palantir. And the impetus for that all in was, again, alignment of mission. Folks forget that Palantir was born out of crisis, where we had the attacks of September 11th, looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack of haystacks. Um, and with Sham and Aki and others, the solution that the PayPal mafia brought to that challenge was the ontology. And I was intentional with my words on digital transformation because that is Palantir's contribution to that problem space, right? And I do think that's a differentiator in the digital transformation landscape, where I can take whatever that process is, data-driven decision making, supply chain, fintech, you name it, and model that out as code, and I can measure the performance of it, place that under iterative development, And so I do think that remains a differentiator in terms of platform. Now, what excites me the most, and where why I'm less Pollyannish on the whole hype cycle, is if I apply large language models to an ontology in a way that allows me to do all of those same functions, right? Where I can measure, have some transparency, normalize, do all of those things that get after that transformative piece. Then heck yeah, I'm excited, right? That part gives me hope that large language models are going to get after a really hard problem that we don't have, that I don't think we've optimized the solution for.
LLMs have made what was in Foundry 10 times more valuable, right? Because
100%, 100%.
yeah, it's like Palantir has this amazing foundation in which they figured out through trial and error and a lot of, innovation, that by creating the ontology, they created a set. It's not only the state of the world, but also the behaviors that the world can engage in, and they can make that accessible to people in the field and like actually bring field ops into, data-driven decision making. And it was, literally accessible to those people, right? That's huge. And with LLMs, what's happening now is you can make all of that 10 times more efficient, 10 times better, 10 times more decisioning and actioning than we ever could before. And it's why they've been so fast out of the gate, in my opinion, with like actual success stories. AI PCon 8 just dropped today. I watched a few of the keynotes early, and it's just story after story. American Airlines was really compelling in how they're using this to drive flight operations. I think it's just, people have been slow to really embrace Palantir. I think all these, startups, whether it's Databricks, Palantir, Snowflake, they have big challenges against the incumbents and entrenched technologies and stuff. We talk a lot about this on the show. And I think one of the biggest things that they face is a structural impediment that exists in enterprises. And that structural impediment is typically centralization of IT. And they don't have this ability to create distributed teams that are meant to go out there and solve problems in the real world. So I think, but you're right. You're spot on. Ontology was the thing, is Palantir's contribution, as you put it, to digital transformation, Pat, and that now is just more valuable because LLMs can be a participant in that ecosystem, helping guide operations.
I'm really passionate here, right? Been in this space for a very, very, very long time. If we go back again to the Palantir origin story, they were venture backed by InQtel. I've been a Palantir partner. I was one of the original 6 partner companies. I've been a partner for them for 15 years. But if you ask my mom what it is Palantir or I do every day, no clue, right? And it's not for my lack of trying, right? But I think there is the reality of the technology and then the perception of the technology. And so I think that becomes challenging too in a clickbaity, hype, overhyped environment. And so really that was during my follow up. And sorry to interrupt, Connor.
No, I mean, if you want to know what Palantir is, they have a whole blog on blog series of like what is Palantir and how it's not a data company, it's a technology platform. But even the nuance there, right, is for the lay population, they're not going to understand that. So it's difficult to get the messaging across, and then the misconceptions of the platform itself
Sure.
continue to perverse the conversations with potential customers, existing customers. And then, like Dorian said, when you have a platform that allows you to attack a structural issue inside most modern enterprises, you better be ready for a fight, because you're talking about people's power that they hold inside of an organization, whether that's in the public sector or private sector. So it's a political fight that you need to be willing to have.
Yeah.
Not only a technology fight that you need to be ready for.
Well, you've got an entire industry that is rooted in this is hard. And I don't say that to minimize the challenge. It is a challenging environment. But I got to tell you, as a data nerd, data pipeline solves problem, right? There should not be an enterprise in today's technology landscape that's got data silos. But if I look across both public and private sectors, everybody's got that same challenge, right? I've got, data in one system of record. that for bureaucratic, non-technical reasons isn't friendly with another system of record. So I got to get through all of that institutional infighting to get after the real issue, which is how do I leverage that to support a workflow, right? And so then I lay artificial intelligence on top of that, and I think we've all been in that conversation where folks are just playing buzzword bingo, right? It's like, well, my LLM's better than your LLM. On what effective measure?
LLMs expose the need to have all of your data in one place. You can even hear Mark Benioff's recent podcast, which we'll get to, or his appearance on a podcast where he talked about Salesforce Cloud being a necessary part of the AI journey for at least them to try and have a position in this future. You have to bring in all your data to a place where LMs can actually, or your AI agents can actually use it. You cannot just give it one data silo. Otherwise, that agent only has the context associated with that silo. And when you talk to business operators in any function, are they ever working with just one system? The answer is no. And the obvious thing to point to is like, what are the communication tools, the emails that you're sending out associated with that process? And what are all the Excel spreadsheets that inevitably are pulling in data from multiple?
Or just a trivial one, which is like in Salesforce, you have the demand signal, but in the ERP is the supply signal. And to make a decision, you need both. You know, like I can't just look at the demand signal. I got to look at the supply. You know, can I actually meet the demand? How do I best meet the demand? You know, so it's like the idea that Salesforce would be a platform that solves this problem, I think, is a bit strange because I would never trust Salesforce as a data integration platform where I'm going to bring in my ERP data and then all my other data to Connor, to your point, the emails, everything else. Because if without that, the model and the operator don't have sufficient context to make a decision. We talked about it briefly, and I think Pat kind of reinforced it, which is like some of these structural issues. Maybe bring up that Harvard Business Review study first, because I think what it's highlighting is that right now people want to go out and experiment and place lots of bets. They want to have, you know, thousands of potential AI initiatives throughout the company that, you know, maybe one of them pans out and they get unicorn-like returns. The problem they're having with that is there's just no way to align those people with an outcome the business cares about. And that is a indicator of what we're talking about, this structural impediment that these companies have generally to using technology, whether that's leveraging something like Foundry and the ontology or AI or anything. This inability to decentralize the core function such that a bunch of independent teams can still service the company mission, that has to be solved first, you know, in my opinion. So if you want to pull up that, yeah, this article is great. And it does highlight the nuance of that MIT study,
Yeah.
where they were saying like individuals were having good outcomes, but the companies weren't seeing a benefit, you know, and that is a complete sort of, you know, I think it reinforces what we see every day, which is this inability for organizations to distribute this stuff out and then contribute to a common goal is tough. And companies like Google try to solve this with OKRs, where, you know, the top of the company would give a mission statement about here are the most important things for the company. And then the, you know, the leaders below that would figure out what they're going to do to help contribute to that. And then below that, you know, the individuals with the directors and managers would figure out what they were going to do to contribute it. And they could all operate independently, but because the goals were all aligned in this hierarchy, they all kind of service towards the main mission. But then
Yeah.
there's also the problem of measuring it, you know, like how do you measure it?
So yeah, no, on that measuring piece, I'll double tap a bit on this one, Dorian. So we look at that and it's a hey, 95% of investments produce zero returns. Again, on that measurement piece, how do you measure a return? And um, I think, you know, kind of back to that digital transformation, right? We want to go from caterpillars to butterflies. I don't want fast caterpillars. And I think some organizations are looking at large language or frontier models producing fast caterpillars, where that's reducing the number of developers that I have on a team or producing some output based on some process that may or may not have been well defined. Or I can tell you that um, from an anecdote perspective, why I remain 100% bullish on the technology is that there's two real factors that I see every day in the public space, right? In the public sector space. the democratization of the technology, right? So I said earlier that getting the data out of a silo, that's kind of table space, right? But now I've got it in an ontology, and whether I'm a data nerd like me, a couple master's degrees, one's in operations research, or I'm an analyst that in our public health work that has some policy thing where they're looking after the health and safety of the nation, and they're, how do I use this data to increase my effectiveness in that regard? You know, I had the real, you know, pleasure of a lifetime to support Warp Speed and General Perna's activities, right? And the first thing he came in and said, "Hey, how do I see myself in the context of this global pandemic?" And I can tell you that that work continues, and where we're leveraging large language models and artificial intelligence capability is how do I get more impact given the same number of resources? So whether that's public health scientists, right? That I still got my ontology that's working great. I've normalized all that data. How do I increase the impact delivered across the nation in a way that you know, is aligned with, and I think we've all seen the demand on governmental efficiencies, right? It's working. So when I look at AI, you know, Foundry AIP in that particular vertical, you know, those results are measurable. Now, how do I take that and put it in the context of this article? What's the return on investment there? Maybe those are second order impacts where instead of, you know, we have some type of outbreak that impacts, you know, an entire sector of agriculture, right? We prevented recalls of this particular agricultural product. You don't see that. That's not going to show up in a P&L or a balance sheet. But I can tell you that the folks that are implementing that capability, you know, they're through the moon with it, right?
Yeah, I think that example though, like the risk of a recall can have massive financial ramifications. So as long as you can focus the attention on the potential or the remediation of a potential financial impact, that still works. What we're seeing for a lot of companies, and that this article highlights, is, and I think they call it like planting 10,000 flowers and hoping they all blossom, is that they haven't.
No, hoping one of them, one or two, create unicorn-like returns and the rest die. That's that that's the idea.
Well, one, if you're going to plant, if we go with this analogy, if you're going to plant these flowers in poisoned soil where there's no chance that they scale and you haven't addressed the underlying issues of data silos or security, you rest assured none of your experiments are going to work. But if you can align, like Dorian said, on all these experiments in cohorts that have a value orientation, then at least if the experiment does succeed, you're going to get a true outcome. What we're seeing with a lot of companies is just like, let's just go try AI. Well, what the hell does that mean? You're just going to pick up a tool and see if it does something that might resemble a human operation. It's not a really solid way to experiment.
Yeah, and the measurement problem is tough. I mean, because the thing that business cares about are these high-level metrics, and those are always the culmination of a bunch of small signals in a really complex system. And so to like disaggregate the movement in the movement in the metric and disaggregate that into the individual contributions of these teams or some piece of work that was done way downstream, it is pretty hard. It could borderline impossible. I think you certainly aren't going to make like a direct causal link, but you can make good arguments as to like how the work that was done down here contributed to the movement of that metric. But I think what OKRs was more of a structural way to just ensure that whatever problem you are working on, even if we don't know how to measure the exact bottom line contribution to the goal, the theory and how it was aligned, in theory, it is some contribution. There is some way it's aligned to the mission. What you don't want to have is like people solving problems that aren't aligned to the mission. And you're like, wait a minute, why are you working on that? That's not, I can't even reason about how that would contribute to what we're doing over here. And I think that's unfortunately more often than not what you see when companies generally go to distribute this kind of thing. And what you're seeing now with Connor, you brought this up last week, which was like individuals are using these tools despite leadership not knowing how they want them applied in the organization and how they would service the goals. And so you do have this problem now of a bunch of people running and be like, this is so cool. Look what I can do with this tool I made, and then leadership's coming in and going like, what the hell are we doing over here? Like, I don't understand in any way, shape, or form how that relates to what we do here.
Pat, what do you see in the public sector from like experimentation? Is the DoD or any governmental organization allowed to be experimenting with AI tools? Because like the risk there is a bit more than maybe a serial manufacturer. Not to say that they're not important, but maybe not as important as a unit in the military.
Yeah, no, the bottom line up front, absolutely, right? And we're fortunate to be engaged in a lot of that work. Um, as a Palantir partner company, I consider myself exceptionally fortunate in the fact that Palantir has articulated their opinion on this subject. They're very opinionated on the value of large language models as a disruptive part of this ecosystem where they are best of class data platform, right? Bring whatever model makes you happy, whether that's a frontier model, right? Then or if in the case of national security, lots of those agencies are developing their own purpose-built models. And the good news is the ontology doesn't care, right? And so when I look at artificial intelligence in that construct, right, and like and Palantir was again, I think Sham and Aki came out and they said, "Hey, here's our definition of artificial intelligence," and they specifically honed in on agentic workflows, right, where I've given the environment a set of tools that help me automate or do things from a decision making perspective in the context of my ontology. So again, to emphatically, at least from my perspective, say that within the public sector, national security and other domains, we've seen enthusiasm with the capabilities. And I think we've all seen the press on the success that Palantir has had in the federal space. Um, we are seeing that similar behavior in the state and local spaces as well, public sector. We're really fortunate to be engaged in really all three levels of that activity. I think it's early days, but I'm hopeful that again with that model where I've taken my business's operating system, the nouns and verbs of that business. So I've done that at least the initial digital transformation enabling activity, and then taken this bleeding edge, best of breed technology and applied it to that workflow.
One of the things that we've been super passionate about is like trying to define foundational ontologies that can empower AI use case or any use case, but in particular AI use cases, so that companies don't get out of the gate at zero. They're starting, a mile down the track rather than having to like figure out that data model and the behaviors and do the system integrations. One of the things I was really excited about when I heard about it was FedStart and like how Palantir was providing these environments now to where you don't have to go through the years of approval before you can even get your product in the market for testing, I guess. And that is, I guess, requires a lot of investment. It's going to take you years before you can even get your product in front of a customer for consideration. Like that's crazy. With FedStart, you go, straight into, it sounds like, the sales cycle. What are your thoughts on like how FedStart, it's particularly in the public sector, how it could be used to then further accelerate AI adoption? Because if you're coming in with like pre-approved products that, meet the requirements of the department, can then we accelerate faster that way with a bunch of independent companies building against this,
Hey guys, this is Connor from the Code and Connor podcast. I hope you're enjoying the episode. I want to make sure you know about the first ever Palantir user conference, FuturOps. It's in Dallas, Texas from October 22nd and 23rd. If you are a Palantir user, a company that invests in Palantir technologies, investors that follow the companies that serve in this ecosystem, or investors that follow Palantir, you absolutely have to be at this event. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to see amazing applications of the technology, and we'll trade ideas and network. We hope to see you there.
Well, you're getting after a couple problems with FedStart, Dorian. And one, I'll tell you the broader problem that you're getting after with platforms like FedStart in both public sector and on the commercial side. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, so think healthcare or think fintech, where the barrier to technology insertion is high, right? There's some friction there. You got three smart guys in a garage with a novel idea of getting after a problem, but they can't communicate to the market in a way that's impactful because of these barriers, right? And so FedStart and things like FedStart get after that problem. In the public sector, and we'll frame this in the national security domain, the same challenge where in a zero trust environment where you say that, hey, all of these things that I can't take any risk on the infrastructure stack, right? So that's the compute through the normalization of data and then through some application hosting, right? So if I can wrap that thing up and say that independent of where you're gonna work on the workflow in that national security domain, we're going to give that to you. And then two guys and two gals in a garage can go out and innovate. We see that rapid digital transformation and uptake of technology. Palantir essentially, and this is another thing where it's been a really amazing to work with them over the last 15 years. They had to do that for their own product, right? So how do I enable Foundry to be successful in this highly regulated environment and again, reduce the barrier to entry for folks to innovate? So they bundle that thing up, called it FedStart, and place it in the market. Similar capability with Apollo, where now I can, um, deploy these AI-enabled applications across the application fabric of an enterprise. One other thing, and I won't pull us too far in the technology weeds, but to get after this problem of measurement and how effective is my data going through the system, there's a technology that I'm really bullish about, and again, it's me being the data nerd. That's part of the Foundry ecosystem called Machinery. And with Machinery, I get to measure, hey, how impactful are either my models or the agents, whatever that thing is that's important to me. Um, I get to deploy that system as code as well in a framework that allows me to get after all of the stuff that these studies are saying. Hey, am I making a difference here, or am I just, being a fanboy on the latest tech?
For the audience, Machinery is a process mining and task mining tool. Essentially, you can process what the life cycle of a transaction in any function is going through from start to finish. So if you're going to add a predictive model or you're going to add a new application, what's the impact on your process adherence to standard or the time it takes for that process to play out or any type of deviations?
It sets up a great feedback loop for you because you can see the change in the process flows as you make changes like in your war rooms or whatever. You go ahead and make changes in the real world, you implement those, then you can see that propagate back through the system and machinery, and you can start to understand, like, are the changes I'm making over here having an impact? What impact are they having? How did the process change? Did we get more efficient at these stages? I think I saw a talk from Castrol Motor Oil at one point that talked about this, how they didn't have machinery at the time. That they were doing this a different way, but they were essentially doing the same thing that machinery enables. So it's a great way to set up feedback loops to understand, like, how are the changes that we're making impacting things, or we're getting to like better out.
So when you put your chief data officer hat on, and you're now agency head, that should be part of your scorecard, right?
So it,
How am I how well am I doing today? Um,
Yep.
and so that's while that technology's been there a bit, I will say that there's still opportunity for us as partners and practitioners to inform some of the executives and buying committees that, hey, you don't have to guess at this, right? We've given you a framework to understand how your organization's performing.
I'm very interested to see how this space grows. Like, because when I heard about FedStart, I was like, man, I wish I knew what government agencies needed because I sure would love to build in this space. It's like you got all these developers like me out there who want to get involved in helping the government. It's just we have no idea what to build. Like I have zero experience in that space, so I'm curious to see like how do you think about growing this area and like how would developers like me who want to build in FedStart understand what the use cases are?
So the interesting part is that this is again like some of the other challenges that we're talking to today. It's a known problem that there's been tremendous investment made into solving. And I think it's like any other market where we're just going to have to single up on best of breed, right? Within the public space, there are a number of software factories that want to go off and do this same thing. I don't think they have the maturity and to go back to, hey, how do we benefit from economies of scale, right? The amount of capital that's been applied to FedStart, um, an agency within a department is going to be hard pressed to get after that because really it's an integration of tooling that Palantir has used to produce their global product, not just in the public sector. And so I think there's going to have to be a rationalization of all of those things. And then, the good news is to kind of get after your immediate question there, Dorian. i- All it takes is an email address. You go sign up and say, "Hey, I'm a builder. I'm interested in this," and you go out and get your Foundry deployment, right? And so FedStart abstracts the rest of the messiness of doing work in the public sector. If you're a great Foundry developer, within 5 minutes, you can get in your garage and get to building things.
Tying it back to the commercial space, like where OKRs were used by Google to like roll up broad level, this is what the company wants to achieve, all the way down to like at the team level, what do we work on and how does that contribute to the company goals? I'm wondering if like agencies would ever just publish the goals that they want to achieve in this fashion. So it was like, big agency rolls up the big goals and then all the smaller agencies could publish their goals. And then like developers could come in and figure out within these problem domains, like where can I be useful in helping this agency achieve the outcome they want. And then software companies could form around some of these things, or at least products. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an area that there's been some work, and I'll go back to my time in uniform, where there are these SIBRs, small business technology innovation, and it's really a formal way for organizations like DARPA or the research labs to announce to the research and development community that, hey, this problem's interesting to me. Give me your thoughts on that. The challenge becomes with that from, commercialization of that capability that the initial funding isn't great, right? So, you're talking, 10K to maybe 150K or so. And so while you can get success at the pilot part, it's when you get to try to transition what's called the valley of death. You've got a capability that folks like. It's capable, it's proven, it solves a problem, but now it's got to interface with the federal acquisition process, right? And I think I saw where last week the administration took a big step forward in killing some of that bureaucratic process, but it's still there. So the three of us or all get together and say, hey, we're going to go make this new capability. We're going to go use FedStart to go put it in the environment. At some point, that capability has to align with some system of record or some budget item to be sustained, right? And you just don't have that friction on the commercial side where, if you get product market fit, you're off and running. It's a little bit more challenging in the public sector space.
Well, hopefully we get reform there to to change that. I would love to see more startups, or especially if they're leveraging AI in a way that can help make the departments more efficient, solve some of the funding issues that they often face. A lot of these departments have really important missions, but they're totally underfunded.
Oh,
So maybe there's a way to help here.
100%. And last little bit that I'll foot stomp. I've had we'll call it the pleasure or an OKR of mine. I've had 2 professional careers. That's it. 56 years old, spent 25 years in the Navy, and then the last 15 years at PVM. And so I am all in on the West winning, right? I'm all in on North American, and democratic values, having an asymmetric advantage over folks that don't value this way of life. And so from that perspective, it's great that Palantir has an opinion there. And Dorian, I think you're right. They want to see other folks get in and win too, right? Which is why they do these things like their new fellowship for the American tech worker. Other organizations are coming in and saying, "Hey, AI is going to reduce the workforce," right? And it's like, well, that's a great thing to hear as a brand new computer science kid at Oregon State, right? I'm giving it my all, and I've got nowhere to end up. Um, Bet on the West, right? And so I think when we look at whether it's Harvard Business Review or MIT, there's one undeniable fact, right? Whether you put it in the AI conversation or not, tech matters. Tech matters. So if we experience this bubble, which I think we all think there'll be some rationalization of the models, right? It has to happen. There'll be best of breed, and there'll be second order impacts of that. But I am hopeful that you go through that and we come out with more innovation, and it makes Western society better.
Yeah, totally aligned with that. Maybe it's a good time, Connor, to jump into that all-in pod clip. They were talking a little bit about this last week, and the leading indicator they pointed to was a couple of things. There's the MIT study, but also the NVIDIA report on small language models. And I think that trend towards small language models, that's the thing we've been building for. I think that is the thing where, like, if you hit the valley of despair, what brings us out the other end with more innovation is this commitment to specialization, orchestration of a large number of specialized models, auto routing, where things should go. I think that might be the key value. And maybe we bring up that clip just to see what they had to say.
AI mania hit a bit of a detour this week. All over the 3 or 4 days, AI stocks were down across the board because of this MIT study that went viral, as well as Sam Altman's comments about a bubble and Zuck instituting a hiring freeze in AI after going on a complete blitzkrieg. So let's get into it.
What I would tell you is that I think the first wave was just a lot of boards who read the words AI somewhere in an article and then went to a board meeting and turned to the CEO and said, "What's your AI strategy?" Mm-hmm. And then the CEO turns around and sends that down into their org, and it eventually hits the CTO's desk. And I think the first wave is mostly people just spending money because they had large existing budgets. And so they were like, let's just go and try a bunch of different things. And I think now we're going through the sorting function of realizing that there's a big difference between probabilistic software and deterministic software. That's probably the biggest reason why you're seeing so many failure modes in sales and marketing. It's very hard to codify sales and marketing into a set of heuristics that never change. But back office processes, why they're so good and a great target for AI is ultimately we have so many people that have been hired to deal with edge cases, right? I think like that's what people do in most companies is they're in charge of a process and they're dealing with edge cases. And I think that you can get extremely high rates of accuracy if you implement AI correctly in back office tasks.
Connor, if you want to talk, we talked about this when we founded the company, which was that we didn't want to go after the knowledge workers and the people, the secret sauce of a company. Like, we felt that there's no way LLMs are going to be up to that task, and that'll probably remain the domain of humans for quite a while. It was the undifferentiated heavy lifting in the back office that we wanted to go after. And it was really obvious to us at the time, like, man, if we just build specialized systems and models that deal with these particular job functions, maybe you don't eliminate the human entirely, but you get to a point where they're way more productive, so you can take massive cost out of these operations. And because they're undifferentiated, the market potential is huge because you can build like one executive assistant that can run in any company basically, because they all use the same information systems. They're all using Outlook, they're all using Drive, OneDrive, they're all using Teams. And like, if you just build the natural language layer integrations for these things along with specialized models, next thing you know, you can build these very highly efficient, highly specialized things. I think Chamath said one thing in there too that is hard to unpack, but he said there's a big difference between deterministic and non-deterministic systems. And what he's really referring to there are the programmable neural nets that we call LLMs. They aren't deterministic, meaning given the same input, they can produce very different outputs. Right? And so you have this very hard problem of all these long tail of edge cases you have to encounter and deal with. And that gets way harder when you're dealing with a very hard, sophisticated job function like sales and marketing, right? There are almost infinite pathways there versus executive concierge, maybe not as many pathways, and so it's easier.
We watched when the technology first came out, we watched everyone try and inject it into the most important process inside their company. And even though everyone was like, hey, these are not going to be 100% accurate like you are today, right? You have a ton of people doing things to get to nearly 100% accurate in those things. Everyone just threw reason and caution to the wind and just started trying to use it in those domains, which I think is one of the reasons why you get this, whether it's 95% or whatever the failure rate actually is, these type of headlines, is because people wanted it to be 100% perfect and hyper differentiate their most important processes. And when you had the human element inside those business functions start to reject the principles of this tech, which, they are fallible, they're not going to be 100% accurate, that caused the rejection or the failure rate. If you can refocus it on maybe high volume, less risky task or functions inside a business, like procurement in certain companies, maybe not in acquisitions in the military, but if you can focus it on back office function or the administrative tasks that are being done by
payroll controllers, executive concierge, there's a million of these functions that could benefit from this.
And so I'll continue to pull that thread, Connor, about let's just look at DoD acquisition, right? And I think the comments about deterministic versus probabilistic or stochastic, right? And where we've seen the most success using large language models, and that's aligned with their behavior, right? So it is going to give you a range of output given a certain input, right? And I'm not including hallucination in there, which may give you an outlier. So in the acquisition process today, I put out a set of requirements, right? And industry responds with a number of solutions to that, right? There's going to be some right and left parameters on that initial pass. It's either going to meet my requirement or it's not going to meet my requirement. The process that which they go through that winnowing is months long because I have some poor soul looking through every one of those and saying, yep, looking for, the reason, well, it's not compliant, right? And so the quality and the variance associated with that first pass isn't great. So you leave some innovation on the table because you're not rigorously applying the standard due to fatigue. Great place for a large language model, right? To go through and say for that first pass out of 1,000, if I can get that down to, the center of mass of things that really get after the problem space, I'm winning. And from my perspective, large language models are really good at that type of work where, hey, given this, here's a set of tools to measure this, right? And you put some machine learning model in there for that tool, whether that's pricing or some model that I can put in a Jupyter notebook or some of those things. And then I get that output and I give it to either a panel of folks, and then we do another pass, and then we score the thing at the end, and away we go. Where I think we had some expectation mismatches when our community, the tech community, came back and said, yeah, we're 5 years away from AGI. I'm not one-shotting any code that my company delivers today, right? We're just not going to do that, right? I wouldn't take a developer, right? A seasoned senior developer and have him one-shot code that I deliver to customer without going through all of my gates and reviews and all of those things, right? So I think it's an unrealistic expectation that we can think we can throw money at that problem and do that in a way that's automated.
Bill of goods that was sold to the market, and that's where this AI bubble talk is coming from, which was that if we just throw more compute at the problem, we're going to get over that hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always thought that was laughable. Like, no, these are features, not bugs of the system. You're not going to drive these out. These are foundational to how the technology works, you know? And so like, it was always funny to like, I never believed any of that hype. And I think a lot of the people who've been building for that future now are in a really good position to accelerate. Like I was telling you, Connor, the other day, like fortunes are made on the way down and collected on the way up. I actually heard that line on the All In Pod. Jay Cal said that on one episode. I was like, yeah, he's right about that. You know, and as we hit this valley of despair and sort of, you know, a lot of these ideas that we were 5 years away from AGI are just proven demonstrably wrong. The way up is going to be amazing because anyone who was accepting of these things was building for that future so well positioned to now accelerate, like hit the gas pedal and really move. And I think right now, like it's just important that we think about the use cases where this is going to be super valuable. Like, you know, how do we actually leverage this technology in a way that yields the right outcome? One of the things I keep coming back to is like, you don't get the human out of the loop in almost any use case, but like there's specific technologies in the context of rules. And what I often see is like these use cases where humans are expected to process information at non-human scales. Like if you're accepting a proposal and you've got to go through and figure out if this proposal meets all of the requirements, but all of the requirements is 10,000 pages of text. And now somehow you're expecting human beings to somehow know, like, does this proposal, you know, check every box in the 10,000 page document that, you know, talks about how this thing should be submitted? No human being on earth can answer that question, even with the current technology we have or had. I do think there's this thing that Palantir's been working on and that Amazon is deeply rooted in solving, which is called automated reasoning or symbolic logic or neural symbolic programming. And it attempts to encode the rules that are in these unstructured data sources, like these 10,000 page documents that describe how proposals should be accepted, and then put those into actually computable functions. And they insert variables for where all the parameters would come from in the proposal. And once the LLM gets the proposal, its job is to now extract all the parameters that these logic functions that were created from the 10,000 page document need to evaluate, right? This is a form of neural symbolic programming. LLMs are amazing at this. And like, it actually is a massive, and even if it doesn't get everything right, I guarantee you it's better than the current way of doing it, you know?
Sure.
And so, yeah, you know, to me, I think that's a really exciting. I know Palantir's product is called like guidelines, I believe is what it's called. I saw a demo of it in the hospital operations context. Amazon's automated reason product is part of Bedrock, I believe. And both of those, I think, are going to be a huge value unlock for a massive range of use cases we can start looking at.
Here's another one where we talk about return on investment, and we'll keep it in the public domain where I think we all saw as part of last year's political season, where there was criticism, well placed, about our inability to track the federal spend. There's just money missing. It's not necessarily
lot.
missing. It's I've awarded a
To be honest,
contract.
there's a Pentagon fail. I forget. It was like 8. All of them? Oh, wait, all of them. Yeah, that's right.
I've got
Never
this
passed an
contract
audit.
that's like 70% done. So I've placed a wedge against that money. But we've all agreed that, hey, what you're giving me is good enough, you're done. That 30% is still reserved. It hasn't gone anywhere, but it's not allowed to be spent anywhere. So it's missing, right? And while, you know, we rightfully criticize that organization for having that challenge, I will submit to you that, and I'll since it's just us, I'll share. I've probably got a much smaller scale issue within my company where I'm probably got too many SaaS subscriptions or overlapping SaaS subscriptions or whatever that thing is. That is a perfect use case for a large language model, right? Hey, you go read 17 million spreadsheets and see where I've got some mismatch, right? In that vein, right, the return on investment's high. It pays for that $100 million, $100 billion investment that you make, um, in a time frame that I think we would all find acceptable.
Yeah, I would file this under like first principle thinking as to how you figure out use cases rather than jumping to and the principles are like what are the features of the technology? Like what are these things good at? Andrew Karpathy gave a great talk recently on what he calls it software 3.0, and he tried to outline some principles of like what is different with software 3.0 than with previous iterations. And he was like, well, we have these new programmable neural nets, and they're programmed by natural language. You don't have to write code to program them, and they're general purpose. They can reach a huge category of domains. And how is that changing the stack? And he was pointing to like, well, now like language is becoming a huge part of GitHub. That's all these prompts that are driving like large language models and stuff. But like getting to the principal part of it is like, well, these are non-deterministic systems. I got into the fact that, like given the same input, you get different output. They're fallible, these are fallible systems and they always will be, so like when you sit down and you start looking at those features, which are the principles we should be speaking about, then you start like narrowing down the category of use cases where this would be applicable. But thinking about their ability to process language is crazy. And it's even leading to like use cases that may not be obvious when you start thinking about it, but that ability to interpret language lends itself to things where research teams are now spinning up their own models. They're actually using small language models in a lot of cases, or sort of mid-sized models. So do things like predicting protein sequences and some of these other things that in traditional life science has been very difficult to compute traditionally. These LLMs are very good at taking, and this is the interesting thing about GPUs and matrix multiplication and statistics. They can calculate things as an approximation of a brute force approach that are actually accurate, and they do well, right? So like you don't have to compute every permutation of a protein, right? What the LLM will do is like find the intelligible ones based on the sequences you fed it during training and start spitting out probable answers. Like this might work. This is in the domain of probable solutions, and it only knows that because of the existing solutions. And you don't have to compute every sequence. And so what's interesting about that is this approach where the probabilistic nature becomes an advantage when you're trying to discover something new. There is no necessarily right answer as long as the solution is testable, right? Like you could verify that the solution is actually viable. It is opening up avenues where traditionally maybe our only other option might have been a brute force approach, and it can
Yep.
actually learn from the embedded syntax inside these things. Because if you think about it, protein sequences do encode human understanding about life sciences in a way. And that I think that's why these LLMs are doing a good job at actually finding some of these solutions, is that that pattern of language extends to almost any domain how we represent intelligence and knowledge. Like, yeah, there's, the language we write in books, but there's also things like mathematical syntax and things we encode in life sciences. Chemical engineering is another one where they're looking at chemistry and how can LLMs learn from our dialect around chemistry to propose new things.
No, I absolutely love that, Dorian. In that, what I'll kind of offer is that domain, right? You've constrained it to an R&D. Hey, I expect failure, right? But I need to go fast, right? And it needs to be in a way that's scalable, repeatable, leverages all of the resources in a way that is risk tolerant, right? And I think Connor, I'm really excited about platforms like this. We can get after telling the story about, hey, the rest of the market, where while you may have been told all of this, here's the reality of it. And I'm I don't want to seem as though we're bashing Sam Altman, because I think he's done the technology space a huge favor by getting people focused and resources. He's really great at that. Applied to something that's going to move the needle. Where it moves the needle to, yet to be determined. But I am bullish about the impact of frontier and large language models. Today, I think we'll look back on this period in the same way, we looked at, pets.com when that was all the hype, right? And it was like, hey, the success of the internet is going to be a domain name that's 7 characters long, right? And it's catchy. And I don't think anybody cares about a URL anymore, right? It's what's the utility that I'm getting out of that either SaaS or web service.
Hey guys, this is Connor from the Code and Connor podcast. I hope you're enjoying the episode. I want to make sure you know about the first ever Palantir user conference, FuturOps. It's in Dallas, Texas from October 22nd and 23rd. If you are a Palantir user, a company that invests in Palantir technologies, investors that follow the companies that serve in this ecosystem, or investors that follow Palantir, you absolutely have to be at this event. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to see amazing applications of the technology, and we'll trade ideas and network. We hope to see you there.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot more. It's interesting. There's a lot of successes happening out there too. Like I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the stuff Mark Benioff was pointing to, and then we'll talk a little bit about maybe some of the successes Palantir is pointing to.
Yeah. Well, I think again, they're both rooted in solving for some of the critical challenges that you need, right? You need to be able to bring all your data in, get rid of data silos. You need to have a federated capability such that you can try and address multiple problems through experimentation that also can scale, and that you have a firm understanding of the cost associated with these things. I think as every single new model comes out, people jump to it and they don't understand that there's a token proliferation that's causing some of this stuff to be hyper inflated from a cost perspective. But putting all that stuff aside, we'll start with Salesforce. If you watch Mark Benioff's, well, he was on a podcast with, it was called 20 VC, I think, but he talked about how Salesforce as an organization misses huge amounts of customer interaction. They simply can't even pick up the phone or the proverbial phone when customers are potentially calling. They're applying AI on the sales side in that regard, such that they can pick up the phone. So if a human operator is not able to service that interaction, that they have an AI workforce, which goes to the first point, like maybe we're not going to just like fire everybody, but we can actually capture more market. So that's a great side. On the opposite side, and we're going to call this a success because it's a technology success, but to be realistic about the impact of this technology, it came out yesterday that essentially 4,000 customer service jobs at Salesforce no longer exist. Yeah. And Mark pointed directly to AI being the cause, the culprit, or the innovation that led to that. So the successes at Salesforce are certainly being realized and now being presented to the market as little as the last week.
Yeah, and Palantir's on Alex Karp said in the last earnings call, he wants to keep the company headcount. I think it's actually going to be lower. His target is lower than what it's at now. And I think one of the things he was pointing to is not only their operational efficiency, but AI. Like if we can leverage that AI FDE, we don't need as many people. We can do more with less.
Yeah, no, he did come out and say that. I think they're 375 billion on their market cap, somewhere around there, with less than 5,000 folks, right? And
it's crazy.
And Alex came in and said, "Hey, we're going to drive that number down a bit too." There, I think part of that dialogue involves them really becoming a SaaS organization and letting the ecosystem of service providers like mine step into some of those functions that if you're a product company, right, the more cycles you can get at innovation as opposed to sustainment activities, the more agile you'll become. Connor, to pull the thread a little bit on kind of that Salesforce thing, where does it make sense for me to have a call center where I can do a virtual call center? One of the things I'm interested in seeing how the technology continues is now that I've got a local foundation model on this thing that we don't leave home without. The use case I see is that, hey, here I am in our company headquarters here in the Tampa Bay part of Florida. I need to get to San Diego. Do I really need to log into a website and go talk to somebody to do that? Right? Can I set up a left and right boundaries on this day? I need a plane ticket, right? And I think that's well within a large language model or frontier models to have that, to consummate that task, right? And so that disruptive, right? Would that make me happier as a frequent flyer? Absolutely. Right now, I get that non-differentiated time back to go do something more impactful. So I think there will be a blend of, NVIDIA clearly owns the compute um, landscape today, right? We've got to get after all of that vector math. But at some point, that technology comes down and that barrier to entry gets smaller, and so I get a proliferation of large language models, but models that are
Yep.
capable of some form of pattern matching to get after work. And then the agentic part of that, where I have small models talking to big models, talking to enterprise models. That's exciting, right? That value prop associated in that, which is what, again, if you put your kind of Wayback Machine on, that's what the internet was supposed to do, right? We have all these REST APIs and all those things, and machines talking to machines, and magic happens, right? Um, this could be a part of that magic.
I'm old enough to remember SOAP web services and that it was supposed
Oh
to
yeah.
be this self-discovery mechanism for,
I am not ashamed to say I wrote
Yep.
some soap whistles a month ago.
Yep. Nice. Oh my gosh. All right. That's still out there. That's cool.
I work in the government.
There you go. Yes. The theory we have is that what we need rapidly, like, is a natural language layer. So, like, to unlock all the use cases you were talking about, LLM on my phone, LLM on my laptop, SMLs probably, or small language models running here, LLMs in the cloud, and them all working together is like they all communicate in language. And as it turns out, they kind of suck at calling APIs. Like, we've tried to make that work, it doesn't work.
Mhm.
They're not good at it. The error rates are too high. But what if you could just build a natural language layer, and then you could have models do the easy parts of pulling out parameters off the incoming text, provided they're there, and then you actually write deterministic code that after the model's done
Mhm.
the parameter extraction that does all the API calling. And that's how we've been building. And I think what you're going to see is like this natural language layer above the rest, the global, called the global API economy. That's the thing that's actually going to lead to the automation. Because my theory is that most of the menial jobs are spent interacting with the global API economy through a UI layer. They're literally sitting in software all day, like typing in stuff that goes into the global API economy, whether that's emails that are being sent or Slack messages or, ERP entries, CRM entries, like, and recording the information flow essentially. And the way they do it is through the global, or to your point, booking travel. That's all done through the global API economy. In fact, sites like Kayak and Expedia actually wrap the underlying airline systems, so like there is this massive sort of connected web. And the challenge has always been like, how would you let machines interact there? And I think it has been this problem of like, well, you need very structured, very deterministic inputs, and we only have one way to compute this. And natural language processing in the past has sucked. Now you have these sort of general purpose neural nets. If you can actually build this, and this is what the next video I'm putting out is about, is how we are building this. The race becomes, how fast can I wrap every API function in this layer and then expose that as what the MCP world's trying to do with model context protocol. We want to actually expose it as a software development kit. But if I can expose that to the world, how fast can we then use technologies like Palantir to then actually build these agentic workflows that are successful and do meaningful things? But I think the precondition is you really have to have this like natural language layer above the global API economy. And then these agents can actually interact through language and with humans in the loop. And that's the sole interface layer. You literally don't need another interface layer. It's
Yeah.
just literally language becomes the inputs and outputs.
Well, we'll have to have a sidebar on this one and get after it. I'll tell you my views on this and what we're doing. What I think is one of the um, most underappreciated part of kind of the Foundry ecosystem is the OSDK, right? So I can get after the entire ontology, right? The entire Foundry ecosystem from a REST API call, right? So um, I use this thing, have a frontier model on this thing, hit an OSDK endpoint, and now I'm in Foundry. Now I've got my ontology. So when I look at it in the context of your kind of natural machine to machine language, right? I can go through that entire digital transformation workflow. So here it may be hit the ontology to go out and have an AIP look at flight schedules. Right. So now whether it's Kayak or United, whatever that thing is, right? AIP is within Foundry, can do that call, give me a set of answers, and then move the puck forward to the next step in the ontology. And at the end of the day, I just get an output, right? It comes to me as some JSON payload as after that thing works. Now that can be obviously, that's probably going to be what we would consider a long running workflow. Um, But, the good news is that you guys put together a Palantir podcast, so I can be completely um, baked into the Palantir ecosystem as we provide these solutions. But that's exciting to me, right? So we not only have all of the capabilities in platform, but to get after the problem wherever you are, whether that's on some edge device that's got some IP connectivity, and then my back end suite of solutions is complete, right? I don't need to do all of that processing locally or all of those API calls locally. And I can do that in a way that's secure, right? Given all of the baked in security of the ontology.
Well, that's another reason why you want to apply this technology to like back office functions where there's not like as risky for the organization, is because most of those processes, particularly in enterprise, are long running. And so like if you can harness it and apply it to the right set of use cases that can be long running, that then can use this technology in an effective way and then deploy the ontology for all of its benefits, you really can get a large ROI. But you have to focus your attention on the use cases that are viable and then can have that ROI.
Oddly enough, email has emerged as one of those use cases that Palantir is actually really good at managing. Like they recently built these event listeners that can attach to emails, and we hooked it up to our G Suite implementation. And what you do is you're essentially publishing events from Google's GCP pub subsystem into Foundry. Foundry finds the event, and then you can trigger a workflow in response to that new incoming email. And what's interesting about this is that a lot of the information we need to perform a job function related to interacting with the global API economy comes through email every day, right?
Mm.
It's like, oh, what time was the meeting resolution that everyone can meet at? Oh, this contract just arrived, it's fully executed. Now we can go on with this. Or, oh, this inbound sales lead just came in. Who do I route this to? The amount of things that come through email are crazy, right? But actually, what we're doing is we get this signal, it goes through, it triggers an AIP automated Foundry. Then we built this whole extraction layer that essentially figures out, goes through a classification step, like what kind of email is this? What specialized agent do I have that works with this kind of email? Okay, let me invoke that thing. That agent then kicks off and goes, okay, I see what this is related to. I've searched the people in this email thread, and I can see that Connor Deeks has been working on the sales pursuit in the ontology. We leverage the ontology for this because we process a lot of the data. Okay, now I'm going to pull out all the details of what they agreed on, and maybe I initiate a contracting workflow because I actually have the details of like the start dates, the duration, number of people involved. That's actually all in that email thread at the end of the day, right? So like this is the prime example of where if you add a natural language layer on top of the global API economy, that's primary job is to classify and extract the parameters for these things that we've like the type of things we've created. We call them tools. Then you can actually start triggering workflows straight from the natural language layer. You don't actually have to go into the software anymore. And to me, that's what I want. That's the future I want to see. I don't ever want to have to use another piece of software again. I want to be able to drive everything through a language interface, whether that's email or chat or like a text thread on my phone or talking to my phone. And that's it. I don't want to remember the fucking settings in this thing. I don't want to remember what screen do I go to do this again. Like, yeah, I don't want the fucking help button. I just want to talk to the thing and have it work, you know? So like that's the future I'm trying to build for.
I mean, when Dorian presented that to me, as we were starting the company. I was like, if that's not the future we all want, then I don't know what people are thinking. Because it, the goal of this technology and the revolution, in my mind, is how do we get back to having like human interaction in business? And one of the main ways we'll do that is to stop fucking spending all our time clicking in a bunch of user interfaces that we memorized. Like when we wrote this article, like, and Dorian questioned back, well, how many interfaces do you think you have memorized? And you start to think about like all the websites that you've stored away in some part of your brain, or every enterprise software that you have to use. You're like, I've memorized so much worthless information. If I could just talk and have it, perform the operation and then feed back to me something I can review. Wow, wouldn't that be nice? And then you think, well, can I get rid of emails? How much time do I spend in emails? It is insane amounts of everybody's jobs today, particularly in very business focused functions. You are spending 20 to 40% of your time either sitting in a meeting or writing emails. We don't need to be doing that.
No, it's not value added.
The 90s had to offer.
Yeah, non-value added, non-differentiated, but we got to be careful about that because, and I'll share, my frustration is a lot of that is just not much signal in that email, a ton of noise, right? And I get it. Everybody's trying to introduce me to their latest innovations, but that's not my primary medium for consuming that information, right? It's disruptive to my work. I get in, here's my inbox, tell me the stuff I want, and then the other stuff, give it to me someplace else. So in violent agreement with you. I think one of the big takeaways that I've gotten kind of out of this last few minutes of talking is the value of platforms, right? And I think if we go back to our original conversation about the landscape, the ecosystem of large language models, what's the platform there, right? Google Gemini has their way of getting after their model. Obviously, the OpenAI folks and Claude. But if from a technologist perspective, right, I want a piece of tech that works. I don't need to go through and say, hey, do that evaluation part of it before I get started, right? And I think that also adds friction. And I'm excited for the day that the number goes from a dozen to a few best of class, given the purpose, right? Some general purpose. And then that decision space for me is less chaotic, right? And I can get after getting that value piece done. And I think once that rationalization happens, then you have a chance to get after the ROI piece, right? But until everybody's still sharp elbows and figuring out whether I'm going to do cursor with Claude or cursor with some other thing, right? And we're still trying to one shot the next unicorn app, right? We got to get through that craziness, I think, a bit before we can get some real value.
I agree. I mean, and I think Palantir is going to emerge as one of the winners here. Like, I don't see.
I think they are.
Yeah.
Given that you go all the way back to 2001, and I think they founded in 2003. They are, from my perspective, and albeit it's biased, they're just best positioned to do it. Right? Tell me a easier way to get after enterprise data. Right? So, all right, you've got an ERP. All right, I'll take all your ERP with Hyper Auto and all of that. What used to just be really painful to get work out of an ERP into this normalized data, I push a button and here it comes, right? And
That's right.
so I can get after ERP, I can get after CRM data, I can get after sensor data, right? So you instrumented all of that stuff. I can get after that. And if I'm the chief data officer, put it in one spot and then let me map over the business on top of that. And then now I can automate, right? And tell me who else does that in a way that's at global scale. I can't think of anybody, right?
You can give an LLM the missing context so you can speak about things the way you would to another human, and it can fill in the gaps too. Like once you bring all that data together the way you're describing, I don't need to explicitly say which Connor Deeks I'm talking about as identified by his email address. Like I can literally just say his name and the LLM knows which one I'm talking. Just say Connor and the LLM knows based on my conversation history of what we store in the ontology that I'm talking about Connor Deeks. So like the reason Foundry is now 10 times more valuable is we want to use language now to be the inputs to the API economy. Well, the only way we can do that is if we give the LLM all of the context around those conversations, which don't exist within just the email thread. They actually exist in a lot of other systems. Now you start to realize as an AI systems engineer and applied AI person, like, oh, this isn't a problem of like, how do I do workflow automation or use LLMs to do next best action? It's a data integration problem. How do I bring together all of the data necessary to give the LLM the complete picture of what the hell I'm talking about here? That's a 10-year, $2 billion problem. It's not a 2-month, $1 million problem.
And to do that at global scale, right? And so, and I think we mentioned some of the other brands that are out there, and of course, you've got other folks that do the data piece. You got other folks that do the integration piece, the security piece, but to put all of that in a platform that cloud agnostic, right? I can Azure, GCP, AWS, don't care. And yeah, so that I'm still a big fanboy.
Well, yeah, if you peg why is AIP so successful, or why are people getting success out of it? It's because of Foundry. Like you can
100%.
bring all the data in. Like, yes, it's the leading thing, particularly from a go-to-market perspective. But I think most people's aha moments in the power of the platform is simply being able to bring in all their data in one place and do something with it, whether it's AI driven or, software 2.0 or software 1.0.
And I keep all the pedigree of the data. And this is the other fallacy, don't care about your data. Your data is your data. Do with it what you will. It's Palantir's not a data company. They're a platform that allows you to get utility out of the data.
Which is not true of all these other services you use.
Not true at all.
Gmail, like I use it, but I know what Google's doing with that.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Gosh, yeah. I wish there was a Foundry native like email, Foundry native Slack. If all these things would just re-platform on Foundry and I could own all my data first party, yeah, I have to pay for the compute and infrastructure, but I'd rather do that and have sovereign control over all of my data.
There was a large media outlet that put a front page article about how Palantir was stealing everybody's data, and I was like, if you change the noun there to another tech company, then I might be interested, right?
Or that they're a spy company and then I'm just looking at my phone going like, what the hell is this? How many FISA warrants has Palantir had? 0. How many FISA warrants have these companies had? A lot, So like, yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Well, thanks, guys. Today we covered AI's potential bubble, AI adoption in the public and private sector, successes and failures, the technology's potential and where to point it, FedStart and its benefits, among other things. Pat, where can people find and engage you in PVM?
First off, thanks for the opportunity to participate. Had a blast. It is really impressed with the work that you and Dorian are doing, and more importantly, getting the message out that's rooted in realism and practicality. So again, thank you for the opportunity to join. PVMit.com across all of the socials and networks is how you get us. If the most interesting conversations we have as a company are, tell us your hardest problem, whatever that thing is, in a time frame where you want to deliver impact, and that's what gets us out of bed every morning.
Excellent. Well, guys, future episodes coming, more and more guests of partners, customers, content creators, Palantir, other tech companies, you name it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Pat. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.